Mike Oldfield. Whether you know him as the creator of Tubular Bells, or for his genre-defying blend of rock, folk and electronic music, there's no denying his legacy. Today I'm tackling the mammoth task of ranking Oldfield's top 10 albums, from the ones that left us scratching our heads to those timeless classics. And trust me, some of these placements might surprise you. And no, it's not Tubular Bells at number 1 just because it's his most famous album, although I'll say right here and now, it is up there. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more progressive rock videos, so you don't miss out. As I always say on these rankings, they are my personal thoughts, so don't take it too seriously. But what you can do is let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And whilst you are down there, there's that little like button that's just waiting for your approval. Give it a click if you will. It does mean so much to the channel. I'm focusing on the studio albums only, so there's no live records. And we're not counting any of the collaborations or soundtracks, even though Oldfield had his fair share of those. And look, he has almost 30 studio albums, so even if the album ranks low, it doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, it's more of a testament to his talent that even the weaker albums have something to offer. Starting us off at number 10 is the music of the Spheres. Now this album saw Oldfield diving deep into orchestral territory, and while the ambition is impressive, the execution felt actually a little bit cold. Sure, it's a classical album in every sense of the word, lush arrangements, grandiose themes, but what it doesn't do is quite reach the emotional heights of his earlier works. Mojo magazine said of this one, though grand in concept, Oldfield's attempt at classical minimalism lacks the emotional punch his best work delivers. Honestly, it's a technically beautiful album, but for me, it's missing that personal touch that defines his best work. It almost feels like he was stepping back and orchestrating from a distance, rather than diving into the music the way he did on albums like Ommadawn or Tubular Bells. If you're a lover of orchestral music, then you'll probably love it. And it's certainly well composed, but it just doesn't have that same Oldfield magic. It's an album that's easy to admire, but harder to connect with on a deeper level. If I'm recommending a track specifically to listen to from this one, I would go with Harbinger, as it sets the tone for the album with its lush orchestration and sweeping melody. Heaven's Open is next at number 9, and well, it's a curious album. It's the last one Oldfield recorded under the Virgin Records label, and it feels more like a contractual obligation than a passionate project. That's not to say it doesn't have its moments, but it does feel like it's somewhat forced, like he was rushing to wrap things up before moving on to greener pastures. All music said of this one, it's got a jarring blend of soft rock and experimentation. Heaven's Open is notable more for its significance in Oldfield's career than its musical impact. He even sings on this one. Yes, sings. And while it's not a disaster, let's just say that Oldfield's voice isn't his greatest instrument. The title track is decent with a catchy hook, but it's not the kind of deep, immersive experience you expect from Oldfield. The album feels like he was experimenting with different sounds and genres, but it never quite gels into a cohesive statement. It is more interesting for what it represents than for the music itself. I'd recommend the title track from this one to listen to. As I say, it's a rare moment where Oldfield sings lead vocals. And then at number 8, I had Earth Moving. Now here is an album that finds Mike dipping his toes into pop territory this time, and whilst there are some catchy tunes here, it's not quite what Oldfield fans were hoping for. The problem with Earth Moving is that it feels too polished, too safe, and maybe a bit too derivative of the pop music trends at the time. The Guardian newspaper actually went a little bit further by saying Oldfield's attempt at chart-friendly pop falls flat, missing the complexity and innovation that made him a legend. Look, it's not terrible. Songs like Innocent and Hostage are fine for what they are, but it feels like Oldfield was chasing radio airplay rather than crafting the intricate, multi-layered compositions he's known for. There's that commercial sheen over this entire album that strips away a lot of what makes Oldfield unique. It's an interesting snapshot of where he was in the late 80s, but it doesn't quite stand the test of time. The production quality is very much of its era, with lots of synthetic sounds and big choruses, but it does lack that depth of his more experimental work. It's an album I rarely revisit, but it's worth checking out just to see Oldfield trying something different. But just don't expect it to blow your mind. I would suggest the track Innocent from this one, as it's one of the more accessible and radio-friendly tracks. At number 7, we have Man on the Rocks. Now, after a long break from rock albums, Oldfield returned with something more traditional here, essentially a collection of straightforward songs, straightforward rock songs to be more precise. There's no grand conceptual arc here, no sprawling instrumentals, just good old-fashioned rock tunes. Now don't get me wrong, Man on the Rocks has its moments, Sailing is a highlight and Moonshine has that nostalgic, feel-good vibe, but compared to his earlier albums, it feels almost, well, normal. It is a well-crafted album though, but it doesn't really push any boundaries or do anything particularly new. It's a pleasant listen, and there's nothing wrong with that, but when you consider how innovative and groundbreaking he was in the 70s and early 80s, this album feels a bit tame. I feel like he's settling into a more comfortable phase of his career, which is fine if you're expecting the kind of experimental brilliance of Amarak or Hergest Ridge. You won't find it here. Classic Rock magazine described it as a solid, if safe, return to form for Oldfield. While the compositions are enjoyable, Man on the Rocks lacks the adventurous spirit of his early work. I would recommend you check out the track Sailing. It has a real feel-good, straightforward rock track feel to it. The soaring chorus. QE2 comes in at number 6. Now by 1980, the musical landscape was shifting considerably, and Oldfield was clearly paying attention, incorporating elements of new wave and electronic music into his compositions. Uncut described the album as being a fascinating mix of prog rock and new wave influences. QE2 is an album that shows Oldfield's willingness to adapt to changing musical landscapes. This one's got some real gems on it and sees Oldfield experimenting more with electronic sounds, even throwing in some pop sensibilities. Tracks like Taurus Eye and Conflict are quintessential Oldfield, blending intricate melodies with a more modern, almost synthetic sound. And then there's that cover of ABBA's Arrival. Unexpected, sure, but it works in a strange Oldfield way. QE2 is a bit of everything, really. It's an album that's easy to get lost in, and while it doesn't have the same cohesive, conceptual arc as some of the earlier works, it's still an interesting listen. It's one of those albums where Oldfield proves that he can evolve with the times while still maintaining his own unique voice. It may not be his most groundbreaking, but it's definitely a solid, enjoyable album that deserves more recognition than it often gets. Check out Taurus. This is a great example of Mike's progressive rock roots, with a blend of electronic sounds and complex melodies. It's a standout from this experimental period of his. Now this is where things get really good. At number 5, I have Ommadawn. If you like your Oldfield mixed with a bit of folk and a lot of atmosphere, this one's for you. It's an album that feels more personal than many of his other works. There's an emotional weight here that really sets it apart. I'll quote Pitchfork for this one this time, and they said it's a beautiful fusion of folk and progressive rock. Ommadawn stands as one of Oldfield's most intimate and immersive works. The album is breathtaking, from the haunting beauty of the title track to the lush arrangements. Ommadawn feels like a personal journey through Oldfield's mind. It's one of those albums that it's deeply atmospheric, but also incredibly intricate in its composition. The way that he blends folk, progressive rock, and world music influences creates something that's both timeless and unique, and the emotion in the music really shines through, especially in the second half of the album. Now you can feel Oldfield's connection to the material, and what it does is it gives you the whole record a sense of authenticity and depth. This is a kind of album that reveals more layers with every listen. It's a slow burn, but one that's totally worth it. Again, side 1 shades it for me as it's more a sweeping emotional journey filled with folk influences, world music touches, and Mike's masterful guitar work. Going in at number 4 is Hergest Ridge. Now this was released at the shadow of Tubular Bells. This album didn't get the attention it deserved, but it's really a masterpiece in its own right. This is Oldfield in his most pastoral, drawing inspiration from the natural beauty of the Welsh borderlands, where he was living at the time. Some have said that where Tubular Bells was bold and attention-grabbing, this one, Urge's Ridge, feels more introspective, a deeply atmospheric record that transports the listener to another place. Now, to me, this album is peaceful, it's contemplative, and it's absolutely stunning in its subtlety. There's less of the bombast that you get with Tubular Bells. Instead, you have these long flowing compositions that build slowly and naturally, much like the rolling hills Oldfield was inspired by. It's an album that doesn't demand attention, but if you give it time, it pulls you in and creates this serene, immersive experience. The orchestration is lush, with strings and horns weaving throughout. It's a quieter, more introspective album, but one that's incredibly rewarding if you're in the right headspace. I prefer the first side myself, but most times it's quite a pick 'em. Now, number 3 is a bit of a wild card, Amarok. Now, this is Oldfield as his most rebellious and avant-garde. After years of frustration with his label, Amarok was essentially a giant middle finger to the commercial pressures of the musical industry. There's no singles here, no radio-friendly tracks, just an hour of relentless, non-stop musical ideas thrown at you from every direction. Prog Magazine summed this one up as a sonic collage of epic proportions. Amarok is a chaotic masterpiece that defies easy categorization. It's Oldfield at his most fearless. I'll be honest, Amarok is not an easy listen. It's an hour-long track with no breaks, and it swings wildly from one idea to the next. But that's what makes it so brilliant. It's Oldfield refusing to conform, and in the process he's created something that feels really, truly original. The album's full of humour, bizarre sound effects and sudden shifts in tempo and style. It's almost like Oldfield's playing a game with the listener. One minute you're in the middle of a beautiful folk melody, and the next you're hit with a random burst of noise or whimsical spoken word passages. It's an album that keeps you on your toes, and while it might not be for everyone, there's no denying its boldness and creativity. For me, this is one of Oldfield's most underrated work, quite a true masterpiece of experimental music if I'm being fair. No recommendations this time, as the album should only really be played as a whole. Coming in at number 2, we have the album Crises. This is Oldfield at a commercial and creative peak. On one hand you've got Moonlight Shadow, probably his biggest pop hit, and on the other you've got the 20-minute title track, which is a full-blown prog rock epic. It's an album that balances accessibility with his trademark sense of ambition and experimentation. With Crises, Oldfield delivered a record that fused commercial appeal with artistic depth, cementing his place as a musical innovator of the 1980s. Now let's talk about that title track. It's a journey. Crises is one of those compositions where Oldfield pulls out all the stops. There are moments of tension, release, beauty and chaos all packed into this 20-minute piece. It's got that classic Oldfield layering, where you hear something new with every listen. And then you've got Moonlight Shadow, a perfect slice of 80s pop. It's a great example of how Oldfield could write an incredibly catchy tune while still maintaining his signature complexity. And let's not forget Shadow on the Wall, one of Oldfield's heaviest tracks, featuring the unmistakable voice of Roger Chapman. Crisis is a perfect blend of everything that makes Oldfield great: prog epics, catchy pop songs and innovative soundscapes. I would recommend the track In High Places from this one, where John Anderson sings lead vocals in a very individual track. You all know what number 1 is. It could only be this one, and here we are. Of course, it just had to be Tubular Bells. It's the album that started it all and launched Mike Oldfield into the musical stratosphere at just 19 years old. This album didn't just break new ground, it changed the entire landscapes of what an album could be. Don't just take my word for it though. Rolling Stone enthused a groundbreaking fusion of rock, classical and experimental music. Tubular Bells redefined what was possible in the world of instrumental music. Look, it's impossible to overstate the importance of this album. It's one that almost didn't happen. Oldfield was this unknown teenager with a wild idea for an instrumental record that didn't fit neatly into any genre, but Richard Branson took a gamble on it, and the rest is history. From its opening theme, forever immortalised in the film The Exorcist, to the mind-boggling layers of sound, Tubular Bells is that masterpiece. What's amazing is how Oldfield played almost every instrument on the record himself, meticulously layering each part to create the symphonic piece of rock and classical fusion. There's something about this album that still feels fresh today. It's complex, but it never feels pretentious. It's ambitious, but it's also incredibly accessible. Whether you're a prog rock enthusiast or just someone who appreciates good music, Tubular Bells has something for everyone. It's not just Oldfield's best album, it's one of the greatest albums of all time. Again, no recommended track here, as the whole album is a must listen. And that's the list then. Whether you're a long-time Mike Oldfield fan or new to his music, I hope this ranking has given you something to think about. His career spans decades and genres, but through it all he's remained a true innovator. Let me know in the comments what your favourite Mike Oldfield album is. Did I rank them correctly? What would you change? Remember to like and share the video and subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on new videos released to the channel. Until next time, keep spinning those classic albums.